Episode 3. The Cloud. I tower like a city and hover like a kite, titanic yet indistinct, a contradiction floating silently overhead. Soft cliff faces, my shores melt into sky. I am foam on the surface of an invisible ocean of air. You peer up from the depths. I change shape, eroded by the winds. I am disparate, a trend. I am many, as are you, a part of a bigger whole. Each drop describing me as I describe something greater. A climate. I play my part. Energy shivers through me. I move through fields of pressure. Parts of me discharge and fall, grown too heavy to hold against the tireless pull of physics. The cycle begins anew. I am but a stage. You and I are not so different. You hold your bodies less tightly than you imagine, and for only an instant. Then you return. I feel it now. I stand between you and the great beyond. I obscure with my yawning shadow. I see all from above. I feel removed from that below. You sometimes pass by, packed into pressurized tubes. You will never feel it as it is. I grow into a storm. You blame me. I can no more control my expression than you your feelings. I am the border between the emptiness and my output. Even in the midst of the downpour, I feel the sun on my peaks. My back to the earth, I watch the universe turning below me. I am gone by morning. Block. She sat briefly on her bed before crumpling into a heap. Weak sunlight crept in through the gap in the curtains and lit up her profile. Indistinct shadows lounged against the walls. Nowhere to go, and not in a hurry to get there. She felt the weight of her feelings heavy inside her, but moving slowly, like a tide rather than waves. She wanted to create and spill some of the ribbon that was wound up inside her onto a page. She loved to write. It just seemed that quite often the writing didn't love her back, and she couldn't connect. She almost wished for a storm inside that would demand to be captured. This slow growing weight was almost an absence. It defied record. She moved her eyes around the room slowly, trying desperately for a spark of any kind, a connection or description about her surroundings, but they were beyond her grasp. From her sideways perspective, the world seemed almost foreign and slanted. She could feel the block very distinctly. It was enormous, and as hopeless to try to move as throwing your body weight against a cliff face. She caught sight of one of her cats as it strolled past the sliver of hallway visible through the door. The dust motes were still lazily swaying in the sunbeams after her disruptive movement onto the bed. She felt very tired and very anxious. Usually these concepts seemed at odds with one another, but she could tell how deeply connected they were in this moment. Each fed the other. She closed her eyes and settled into the cover, tucking her knees up towards her chest. She was comfy now, at least. She could imagine her room as her mind. Messy, but familiar in hers. She felt very deeply that inside her there was another version of herself, small and afraid, and lying curled up as she. The day had been long, but life would be longer. However, for now at least, she could fade away. As she started to relax and let herself go, a cloud drifted away from the face of the sun, and it got brighter in her room. What she'd assumed was full daylight had been nothing but a pale imitation, blocked by the grey clouds that always hung somewhere above. Her mind lightened just a little in that moment, her perspective being nudged. She opened her eyes again and took in the view. She saw her posters on the wall, denoting slices of her past that were still very much a part of her. Her cat walking softly over one ripped corner, and the clothes strewn in a pile that she'd sort out eventually. She realised then that a fair amount of time must have slipped by. She didn't mind. There were so many places and people out beyond these four small walls, but they were at a comfortable muted distance. She felt as if she was sitting in the cool shade on a hot day, knowing the heat of the sun, but not feeling it. It was a kind of peace, she thought, but wasn't sure. After a few more moments' reflection, she heaved herself upright and leaned off the bed to pick up her laptop, pretending she wasn't able to touch the floor for fear of lava. She felt she had something now, something she could say, or at least the beginning of a something. It was such a relief when she was able to write and get some of it out. The block had begun to be eroded by the tide in her mind. Streams were beginning to trickle through and around. But as she loaded up the empty white rectangle before her, they ran dry once more. How could something she could describe be worth anything? It was always bound to fall embarrassingly short of her vision, like the pale sunlight compared to the heat of the day. The digital blankness seemed to open up and envelop her. She almost wanted to scream for a moment, and then she fell back onto the bed, defeated. She looked up at her ceiling for a very long time. The murky shadows grew slowly and joined until the ceiling was in shade. She realised then how well she knew this sight, this ceiling. How for countless years she'd looked up at the paint with small cracks, her eyes barely seeing it as her mind raced around. Some of those nights had been hell, and yet each morning that same ceiling greeted her, now lit with the light of day. She could even see it as she closed her eyes. There was some comfort in that. All the different people she'd been in the past connected by an unimportant sight, perhaps made important. She let herself slip away again, relaxing, feeling sure she'd be lost to sleep, but not caring. Instead, she became dimly more aware of herself, and the block was soft now. She could feel past it and let out some of her feelings and ideas. Desperate to not return to how it had been, gently roused herself and opened her eyes. The cat walked past again. She loved to see the top of its head and body, continuing so elegantly into its tail. She looked down from the ceiling. Her laptop had gone dark from inactivity, but it waited patiently for her. She sat up cross-legged, and as the last of the light faded from the window, she was lit up by the screen, a crisp shadow thrown against her back wall. She began to type. She was so immersed in her writing, her fingers clicking against the keys, that she failed to notice her cat descending the far wall in the gloom and stepping over onto the floor, before quietly leaving the room. She knew something had changed inside her. She'd witnessed something new, and that was all it had taken to shake the paralysis from her imagination. She couldn't say what. Each sentence she now clumsily but enthusiastically composed seemed to her so important. Her perspective was refreshed. It wasn't how far short of a perceived perfection she fell with her work. It was how much further it was from that empty page. Every new thought and connection contained meaning and value where there had been none before. Anyone reading this would for a moment live inside her ideas, and that was beautiful. There was a joy all of its own in trying to create even when it was hard. The block was not gone, but she realised it had always been there, throughout her life. She lived with the block. So familiar and comfortable, she hadn't noticed it, despite staring at it for hours each day. Those tiny cracks, that room she slept in. She accepted what it was and continued on anyway, each moment carving away at the cracks with the words, until once again trickles seeped through and eventually began to pour. She felt the water and it was cold and refreshing, knowing that at any moment she could roll onto the land and dry in the sun. She worked deep into the night, until her wakefulness evaporated and sleep caught her like a glove. Her cat stalked the house, walking a world of its own perspective, with the sky yawning beneath it unseen. She rose in the morning, sat up slowly before stepping off the bed onto the floor and into a new day. The sunlight spilled brightly through the curtains. Birthdays. The universe has known itself through you for the briefest moment imaginable. You were crafted and spat out by the most unlikely accidental process conceived. An unbroken line of genetic transfer stretches backwards into the distance behind you. Birthed from stars and destined to return. Eat some tasty food. Happy birthday. And so we find ourselves back here again. But what to say that hasn't been said before in 1,000 ways? Fumbling through this claustrophobically finite lexicon in an attempt to communicate this messy and deeply subjective experience we find ourselves unfolding within. Do the limitations of language hold us back from truly connecting with and understanding this universe? Or does the machinery of it lend us clear and novel ways to tag and shape experience into discernible pieces, not only allowing us to understand one another that much better, but equally creating some meaning of its own that would never have been imaginable without? Perhaps, like most things, it is a little of both. If I've learned anything in my short time, it's that all things are far more complicated and nuanced than they first appear. But then again, I'm not sure it's as simple as that. It is problematic to view ourselves as discrete and continuous entities in a context where we are in constant flux. Viewed more as a trend than an agent, our experiences begin to make sense. We are not the same person we were at breakfast, nor will we be when it arrives again. Each moment we persist, the universe can look up at itself and reflect almost imperceptibly on its own nature. No actions or decisions you can take will have a measurable impact on the universe, but we all carry around our own realities that overlap all too briefly with others. It is within this paradigm that we are giants, no, gods of change, with the power to create and destroy. Ideas and emotions are our galaxies and stars. The tiniest perceived ripple can end in the tallest wave. For when we look up at the night sky, it is not the heavens above me that fill me with wonder, but the mind behind the eyes that is capable of wondering. Or even more, the other pair of eyes that gaze up with me. Time has flowed past us like river water around a rock, parting and reforming, and we find ourselves here again. We have passed through yet another year, all of us. We will never be the same as when we started it. people and events leaving impressions that cannot be undone. We take one more step along this plank toward a terminal precipice that will not recede. But with each step we learn, more and more, what we want and how to get it. Who with and how to spend our time. Getting shorter every moment as we share this shivering present. Pause of a moment perhaps, and consider how far you've come, and how much further you have left to go. It is moments like this where we can see the path in both directions, and recognise our power to choose. We create our universes by perceiving them. Let us huddle around campfires with those we love, and sing songs to the sky. We do no harm. What is tradition? What are words? What do they mean? What can be gained? What do we have to lose? Allow these questions to sit outside the glow of the fire briefly, and enjoy the warmth. They know where they are heading. They can feel the path ahead of them. They trace a straight line across the land. They cross rivers and obstacles without thought, clambering over garden fences through the night. Families sometimes hear dull thuds in the late evening or early morning. Tiny impacts in 1,000 lives. They are not so different from us. Where did gods go when they die? We will find out together. Their progress is slow, but never halts. The weather changes above them, and yet their mind is a chamber of stasis. Wider even than the sky, but still as a desert. The spaces between the marks of mankind on the ground, as vast as the darkness between the stars.